the ME262 was destined to be the first active jet fighter in history, one that could have flown actively several years before it did had it not been for the fractioned and infighting German leadership and decision-making on this at the time. However, from 1943, German industry and aircraft production was facing increasing numbers of Allied bombers, and it was now apparent even to Hitler that the aircraft was urgently needed as a fighter, not as a fighter-bomber, as he had initially hoped. And it was also apparent that important, secure locations now had to be found or constructed for the assembly and construction of this and other fighter planes, and of course all other important military production. Over 1,000 of these underground relocations was done throughout Germany and Austria from 1943 in order to protect key assets of production. One of these large, above-ground secure facilities, one of the largest I had seen, was the Weingut hangar type of reinforced bunkers. Several of these were built. It was a simple construction, easy to build, efficient, fast. I visited one of them earlier, and it was, of course later, after the war, demolished by the Americans. But here in Thüringen, the Reimahg bunker construction is something completely different, and of a different design. Several enormous hard-shell reinforced bunkers and factory halls were built against the mountainside, a mountainside that was already full of existing tunnels, and on top of the hill there was a runway for jets to take off straight from the factory. Fritz Sauckel, the Gauleiter of Thüringen, petitioned Goering to urgently install fighter production in the tunnels of the porcelain factory mines at Kala. Here the huge mines had been developed over the years to produce the fine sand for the china the town was known for. This site had already previously been placed on a list suitable for new relocations and suggested as storage for art treasures. Also, it was near significant rail links, thus it was an easy conversion to expand and prepare for actual production. Also nearby were large armaments factories such as the Gustloff Stiftung, and in Thüringen at this time there was a lot of significant underground construction going on, as we already know. Doa Mittelbau was not more than 100 kilometers away in one direction, Jonastal and the S3 were only some 80 kilometers away, Diebner's nuclear lab was being set up as well not far, and the mountains were full of other new relocations and industries. Initially, this was envisaged to build the F-190, but soon after Goering and Sauckel visited and reported to Hitler, it was decided to produce the ME262 here, and Hitler also suggested construction of BMW engines and motors. Before construction, there was already 10,000 square meters of production space available here. In April 1944, forced laborers began to arrive, and they were housed all around the worksite, both in tent camps and existing buildings, billiard halls, whatever room could be found. These were drawn from all over Europe and worked in 2 shifts of 12 hours each day, 24 hours a day. Also, there was a large amount of volunteers and German workers and specialists. Eventually, towards the end of the war, 40 tunnels each, over 400 meters long, was made using the working area. There was 75 tunnels in total, length of 15 kilometers, with 7 main entrances, 2 assembly halls, 100 meters by 30, with 4 major steel concrete reinforced bunkers, 100 meters by 20. The security and guard duty was under the command of SS Brigadenführer Karl Pflomm, and at the end of the war he committed suicide after killing his wife and their 6 children, and even the nanny. About 12,000 prisoners were working here, and between 950 and 1,400 are registered to have perished. The huge tunnel system was said to never have been put into actual production by the end of the war, as they had not been completed. However, the real interesting parts here were these enormous bunkers above ground, inside which ME262s were constructed in an assembly line style, rolled directly from the last assembly hall onto a ramp that would hoist them, the individual planes, up the 40 meters to the mountain top, where a runway had been constructed, from where the planes would actively fly off directly to be armed and for testing, and then put straight into action. It was envisaged that Reimahg would produce 1,000 ME262s a month. After the Jägerstab had been created to consolidate and enhance aircraft production, it had achieved the highest production of the war in 1944, despite Allied bombing. However, prior to this, most of the production had been decentralized in order to safeguard it from bombing. This, of course, would slow down production and assembly, as parts were produced all over the Reich and then transported to a central assembly point that was vulnerable to bombing. The vision here at Reimahg was to construct all the parts and components and make it into a turnkey solution. Now, only 30 airplanes were actually produced that we know of by the end of the war, and the place was taken by the American 89th Infantry Division on April 11th, and as we know, turned it over to the Russians after the war had ended. A deal had been done to such with Stalin, one that left much consternation for both the Germans and the American soldiers who had fought so hard to take this area. The Russian influence did not leave the area until 1992. At the same time, they left Jonastal and Ohrdruf. However, the U.S. retrieved enough parts to build over 5 jets, and whatever else they could take. I cannot find any reports on what they took or what the Russians took. However, it's clear the Russians took everything else that was left over after the handover, and thereafter blew up or destroyed the remaining bunkers. Later, the tunnels were actively used for storage of various things, including munitions, by the East Germans. The West Germans later would simply, as they always do, cover them up. And it seems that by all accounts, a licensed visit to the tunnels is not possible at all. However, I hope to be able to work with the Wolfsberg Foundation by offering them to produce a virtual tour of the entire tunnel system and a LiDAR scan, so they can also establish the condition of the tunnels and make it viewable virtually for the public. Until the very last days of the war, they were continuously working on all of these sites, just like this one. And here behind me you see the remnants of what was to be the bridge leading directly to the site. It was never completed, but, well, it's almost there and the parts are still here. First building on the site is one of the post-war Russian administrative buildings. They were storing munitions here. But what really is interesting is just to see how large this construction hall bunker was. Here's a regular driveway up. This thing is absolutely enormous. It's an enormous reinforced bunker construction hall. This is absolutely amazing to see. So there's the ramp up. All the holes in the walls were all part of the Russians' demolition efforts. And you can see we have pretty much every type of rebar involved in this bunker and a few others. And then there are some that are not reinforced at all. It's almost impossible to describe the enormity of this, the destruction here. I mean, the bunker was enormous and reinforced. That's one thing. So, for the Russians to have blown it with this severity must have taken an enormous amount of explosives. This seems even more destroyed than that of Wolfschanze. And there's still pieces of metal and girders and everything sticking out. And this is very interesting because originally the West German governments had closed this up and covered it up completely. There was dirt and grass all the way out to where the entrance is now. It was then uncovered and then sealed up extremely well with a huge cement foundation in front of the doors. The steel doors were Russian era because the Russians stored munitions in these enormous tunnels. But they did destroy the very, very, very large buildings and the reinforced hangars here. It's interesting that this was covered up for so many years. Now these are classic Russian heavy armored doors that we've seen on so many munition storages before. And it's interesting to close the doors, make sure no one can open them. This entire cement slab was cast in front of the door. So in order for the door to be swung open, if ever such a thing was possible due to rust and time, you'd have to remove that slab. I would say it's a little overkill, but this is how it has been done in Germany and Austria for so many years. Anything to do with the war, the production, battles, forts, concentration camps, labor camps, anything that could be covered up and just hidden and forgotten, covered up with dirt, just was. And it doesn't do the victims justice, it doesn't do justice to the soldiers or anybody else from that time to simply just cover up the things you don't like. However, that is the world we live in. So I'm kind of glad at least this is open. There's a memorial here to remember what happened here. Now at the far end of the complex, the roadway I'm walking on is a typical DDR era, Soviet era road. Lay down these prefabricated parts for the roads. And here on the left is the only officially existing entrance to the underground tunnel that can absolutely not be visited without permission. There's a complex of tunnels in here that is not for production of aircraft parts or industry, but looks more like smaller supporting tunnels for small industries, offices, shelters, bunkers, people, that I hope one day I'll be able to show you. There's the remains of this enormous structure that was built in less than a year. There was some 15,000 laborers that worked here, some 3,000 skilled laborers that worked here, 125 companies that worked on airplane production. And that is what makes this so interesting. It's not that here's just another underground facility that makes this interesting. This was the first dedicated factory where literally you could pour in all the raw materials in one end and finished airplanes would come out the other. Whereas Germany was littered with all these small factories, production halls, and facilities all over the country, both in Germany, Austria, Poland, France. There was bits and pieces manufactured for the aircraft, for the weapon systems, and they were all moved, transported to one place, and they're reassembled. Here, it was the complete package of everything was to be assembled, produced, and made inside this mountain. Production never assumed in the mountain because it was just not completed by the time the war ended. However, some 27-30 aircraft were produced and flew off the top of the mountain here above. That is really what is interesting. The expected production output of here was 1,000 aircraft a month, whereas towards at the end of World War II, some 1,300, 1,400 ME262s were completed throughout the entire time of the war. Of course, you had to, just like with the V2s, figure out how everything worked, how to best build it, fix all the kinks. The first prototypes are always more expensive than the production runs, and so on. I get that. But 1,000 ME262s scheduled to run out of this factory every month. This was like the Henry Ford of jet aircraft. It really was an assembly hall. And they started out here in these huge buildings. And honestly, some of these buildings were demolished even more for the steel by the Russians or the East Germans at the time in the 50s, 60s, when steel was scarce. So for it to be lying around here exposed, I'm kind of surprised that it is still here. But they must have used a lot of explosives to get this thing. I mean, this is part of the roof that I'm standing on, or this is where the cavity would have been, the drive-in, the entrance, and then this is the roof that caved in. Part of it sitting up there. Now, we've seen some very large constructions in our time here, but this is something. This hole is just amazing. Well, you know what? I'll go the other way. I said, talking to myself gently. See the steel here. We're coming up to the, well, I guess the height of it. And here's just another crater. And this is the part of the roof, again, that blew apart. It would be interesting to wonder if there are still parts of machinery or anything sitting below here. Of course, all the machinery, actual functioning machinery, the Russians pulled out. But the American army that was here first managed to salvage enough ME262 parts to put a handful of planes together before they had to hand over to the Russians. And everybody knew towards the end of the war that a Cold War was coming, and it was a matter of time. It was a race to secure the German technology, the scientists, the materials, and I have some indication that tells me that specific German research facilities were not bombed because the Americans wanted to get to them intact. And I'm back to the possibility of a deal having been done for them to not have been destroyed by Kammler or others, because it wouldn't take that much for them to destroy everything. This is heavy rebar. This is a serious piece of metal here. So, hay to insulate the walls. And this is the top of the roof that buckled. I guess it blew up somewhere around the center and came down here. I wonder why it was insulated. I mean, it was an open hangar where airplanes could go in and out. Although I'm sure there would have been sliding doors on it as well. But this is wartime insulation. We saw that in Ebensee as well, in the fuel plant. Still wood up there. But this is truly, and to build this entire facility in a year is, I would say, the amazing part. Considering they started in '44, where things were already not going well. And that's also why there's so many Italian prisoners working here. It was around the time where Italy surrendered, and a lot of the Italian soldiers that had fought with the German side were now, this was at the time where Italy changed sides, leaving a lot of Italian soldiers now officially enemies of the Germans they had fought alongside of just weeks before. And from what I hear, the Italian prisoners now that had now been disarmed by the Germans in various places of Europe were not treated particularly well, as they were now, I suppose you could say, treated as traitors by the Germans. See here, this is wood. This is the original wood where the cement was poured on. It's Obviously cracked by time, but yeah, there's more part of the roof came down here. Insulation all the way through, and wood underneath. It looks like the wood they poured the cement on was just left in place. And there's twisted rebar and straight rebar. In case you were wondering, I'm sure you were. Let's give you an idea how this was attached. And held in place by a little string here. So let's go under that and jump here. So we're walking on the collapsed roof. Wow. Yeah. Well, at least to give you an idea of how big the building was. This is the roof that's come over. And you see all the way down here. Here you can sort of see the roof collapsed all the way to the center. We see the outer walls. And you can imagine the factory floor here. And this is one. And believe it or not, this is not the biggest one. There are two like these, and then there's smaller, and then there's one that is absolutely enormous, of several floors of working space above. I wonder how strong this was. I wonder how thick the wall was. Don't have to tell you how tall it was, because, well, this should give you some idea.
Some of the completed tunnels and chambers were intended for accommodating officers and warehouses as well, and there was also a hoist for materials up to the top side.
Now I usually talk a lot, but there's not really much for me to say. I am impressed by the scale, and really would
wonder what the thickness of these were. Given it was built in 44, they knew the power of the Allied bombs and their own. So it was a race uphill with material availability. Of course, there wasn't nearly as much available as anybody would have wanted or needed at that time in that place. So, did they build it with what they had, or did they actually get what they wanted? Hermann Goering sponsored the project. Reimahg, Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering's office. And this is thus the other end. And in here was the platform where trucks would come in and out. Initially, the parts were brought here by rail, brought up here from the rail station by truck, and there was a railway bridge they were building to lead straight up here. Now, of course, the interesting part is, how do I get down? I'm guessing I'm walking back there and over. I'm standing on the roof, which you can see much better from a different angle. This is just with this beautiful little village in the background. And most of these houses around here were used as housing for the prisoners. There's a large Italian encampment up on the hill, but a lot of the buildings were used to house prisoners, inmates. At the peak, some 15,000 worked here. Between 1,000 and 2,000 died. Now behind us in here is the mountain with all the tunnels. And these large buildings would house or cover the tunnel entrances, so you could drive through here and into the mountain. So I'm somewhat standing on a tunnel entrance. Wow, it's beautiful up here. I am guessing this is, let's see from the other side. So that's about a meter and a half thick, and the roof here about the same. So I'm guessing I'm guessing the actual roof could have been a meter and a half or so. It's very hard to tell. Well, I'm guessing this is the way down. Down is always so much easier. Just close your eyes and lean forward and you'll eventually wake up somewhere. Yes, I'm kidding. Here's the original sandstone. This is the original sandstone. And this is the cement. Oh, very interesting. But I said some of these large bunkers they just cover. They're literally built and integrated into the actual mountain. And then the tunnels begin. Round wooden pegs. I think somebody shoved it in there. Well, yeah, I do. I think round holes for cabling and other things. Somebody shoved a round peg in there. I'll come out here. Yeah, now I'm what would have been the inside, the hallway, because here's the insulation again. And I'm imagining this was something left over from the Russians, the DDR time. Now I have noticed I always say the Russians, even though I'm in Poland or East Germany, or what used to be East Germany, which is of course wrong, because the East Germany had the East German army and East German intelligence. The Polish had their own, but it was still under the sphere of the Warsaw Pact and under what I would say is the general control of the Russians. And that's why I continue to say the Russians did, the Russians that, even if it was the actual Poles or East Germans who physically did it. It would at that time still have to have been sanctioned by the Russians in some way, shape or form. Although some independents were at times taken. There's a whole bunch of interesting stories on that. But here you can see how thick the walls were, and the roof is laying right there, and the next wall. And the platform is original from that time period, and here's the staircase down. The tunnels were existing from before the war, and then enlarged, more was built, and what it really amounts to now is some 40 kilometers of tunnels in these mounting here, which is rather significant. You can really see. And the airfield is up here. Somehow this being a beautiful autumn day fits with the sadness of it being a place where people died and a interesting place of history. Now I could be wrong by saying that this looks like a bathroom, and I would imagine this might have been built post-war. Here we're coming around to the next tunnel entrance that is equally sealed up with doors made by the Russians and a cement slab courtesy of the German government. But this is another one of the large drive-in entrances.
Tunnels 1 to 20 were still the old mining area. Tunnels 21 to 36, which were now newly created, were planned with a large cross-section. The smaller tunnels should have a width of about 6 meters and a height of 4 meters. The large production halls should have had a height of 9 meters and a width of 15 meters. This should be the tunnels 33 to 36. The central underground assembly halls, where the construction was completed, these 4 chambers were the heart of the system, in which all aircraft parts and assemblies from all other assembly tunnels came together and were assembled into finished aircraft. These 2 middle chambers, from 34 to 35, led directly to the surface into the back of Bunker 0.
And here was the generators sitting on platforms with the quick lift. Somewhat of a, not the thickest roof I've seen there. These we see a lot. The pipes with covers. Used to be a sliding door or steel door hanging on here, it seems. I would imagine this is newer. But the original cable ducts are probably original. Remember, the Russians were here for a while. Well, the East Germans were here for a while. On here. Now, these platforms are from the time of the DDR during the Cold War, where they would have their generators, pressure airs on here. But the actual cement foundation that they're sitting on were original. Although it looks like right here they were repaired. In case you wonder, the gray boxes up there are put up everywhere for bats to have a place to live in. Remember, we are in Europe. Bats are the most important animals in the world. Do you not know how that came about? Did not know they were formerly endangered, but here we are. Not much to this. And here was the water reservoir for the equipment. And this is the front room. This wall looks new or post-war. Oh, this is one of the other doors. Okay.
Sauckel was one of the old guard of the Nazi Party, and in 1942 he had been appointed as head of the labor deployment by recommendation of Martin Bormann. He had been a Gauleiter in Thüringen since 1927, and after the war he was sentenced for war crimes and hanged. The tunnels led into Bunker 0, in which the final inspection of jet fighters would take place. It had a size of over 100 by 28 meters and a wall and ceiling thickness of 3 meters of reinforced concrete. The large air raid shelters was closed with steel sliding gates also filled with concrete. The factory in the tunnels should have a working area of 150,000 square meters, where it was completed. In addition, there was another 50,000 square meters of production area in the large air raid shelters and above-ground facilities. Thus, this underground relocation would have had a total production area of around 200,000 square meters, thus one of the largest planned underground relocations in the Reich. The completed tunnel system should have reached a length of 30 kilometers, and 15 kilometers of which was completed about a year after construction, just before the war ended.
And just in case you thought this is an interesting rock, this is a piece of cement. And you'll notice no rebar sticking out of it. On these little trails. Here was a very large building that was demolished. This is one of the pieces. But what was interesting about this is that there was practically no rebar used. And I spoke with the head of the association yesterday, the great bunch of guys donating their time and effort to look after this place, the memorial, and he was under the impression it was simply because late in war, no steel available. So they built it with whatever they had, well knowing it wouldn't withstand much bombing, if any. This is just cement poured on more cement. But again, I'm standing on the roof, and you can see why people think this place was bombed by the Allies, which it was not, interestingly enough. Do make a note that we are only about 85 kilometers from Jonasthal and the Jonasthal tunnels. Less to Deepner's nuclear lab in Stadtilm, Ohrdorf proving grounds. But we know what took place here. We know who did what, how it was built, by how many, and how far they got. But what is interesting about Thuringia is that it's such a large military industrial area in such a small part of Germany. Well, relatively small part of Germany. So much industry, production, research was assembled here, which is interesting. Down there is the first large bank bunkers. I'm standing on the roof of the next. After the initial destruction of the main bunkers, some of them were blown up even more in order to harvest all the steel in here, which is another reason why there's so little left. Don't think that counts as rebar. I don't think it does. Oh. That's another rock from the rock of cement. It will not be that many years without preservation before a site like this will have literally turned into something no one would recognize as other than a rock formation. It will just disintegrate slowly and merge with nature, and if it's not preserved, no one will really ever know it was here, and that is important. We have to remember these places and the people who worked here and what was done here. Maybe we can learn something, although I doubt it. really not much that remains from the side of this enormous bunker. All that and that should cover another tunnel entrance in here. And we're slowly making our way down to the ramp where the finished planes would be wheeled up to. Oh, I see a hole in the wall. There is a separate entrance, from what I was told, to a separate, much smaller bunker system. Which is not connecting to the main tunnels, but it should be accessible, from what I was told. And here, you're looking again at the inside of a building. I'm standing on the roof that's collapsed. It's hard to see for all the foliage, but you get the idea. Speaking of ideas, don't know if this was the one. There's still wood sticking out. Okay, so the round wood actually was here. Tied together. Okay, so this was the form. And here certainly is rebar. It's good. Gives something to hang on to. I'm not going to find any planes in there, but sort of have to have a look, don't I? But it gives you an idea just how thick and reinforced this was, and how well destroyed it was. So it's quite possible that this bunker had rebar, but it's one of the ones that were destroyed further in order to harvest that steel. See, if you don't pay attention, this is all cement. And honestly, this is a beautiful walk out here. And it's definitely a place that's worth visiting and taking a walk in the forest. Oh, things move. Mountains, oh, valleys to my left, and the mountain here's to the right, where all the tunnels are. And here's another, oh, you can really see how the collapsed roof. I will say it does look so. Here we're looking at 2 meters, 2 meters reinforced, separate layers, and rebar sticking up further. There might have been a third, so you could look at 2.5, 3 meters. Into. construction-wise, somewhat interesting that this part here looks different than this in its construction layout. I'm babbling. One of the old doors sitting up here. Yes, it is. I think it is. Wow. That's one of the old doors. This is a heavy door with cement inside. What's in there? Well, not much. Here's another one of the steel doors. Cement inside. Why are they just sitting here? Okay, because you can't put everything in a museum. Alright, that'll be one answer. But again, in the DDR time, they were harvesting metal. These two are just laying on the forest floor. There is something that looks like a wall. Wouldn't be surprised if there's tunnel entrances here. I'm sensing upwards. A lot of upwards. Gotta see the runway, right? You want to see the runway, don't you? There's nature coming back with a vengeance. As if you don't know it, you could go for a walk here and you would never really notice the 15,000 people worked here. It was an enormous construction site. And to that you had all the skilled laborers, you had the guards. And if you ever doubted what a collapsed tunnel entrance looks like, I think this is it. Could be wrong. It will be fun to get in there one day and see how large the plateau is. And here again you have construction right on top of the naked rock. Area is famous for porcelain, which is why the mine was here before the war. So here was the entrance over that gap, over that tunnel entrance, covered. I see tool marts, pegs, rebar. So this was all the back wall, or what was down here. And this is where the big building was. The enormous building with the 2 stories. Enormous hole. There's a little hole up here in the back wall. I believe this is the one I was informed was fairly short and fairly safe. Man, that's some heavy rebar. Damn, that's some heavy rebar. Well, look, a hole. It is so big, I don't even have to take my bag off. That is unusual. Alright, I said that a little prematurely, maybe. Well, let's have a look. Ah, well, okay. We're up. More light. Little light good, more light better. Right, let's go up and look at this. Since somebody kindly built a little staircase here too. And I mean, my days really wouldn't be complete without crawling through some sort of tunnel system, would it? Okay, this is bigger than I thought. Clearly one of the unfinished tunnel systems. No cement, no rebar, no steel or anything. But they were still constructing a lot of these. When the war ended, here's all the bats. Let's not disturb those guys. So this is where they start building this thing. There's all wood. Yeah, this is an end. See, we can coexist with bats. They're hanging here peacefully from the ceiling. I don't bother them, they don't bother me. We can do history and bats at the same time. Case in point. I don't know why somebody started digging a hole there. Find them and ask. And it would make sense why there would be a tunnel system behind the large building, or at least why they were planning one, so they could I mean, you would need storage, office, safety, bombing. And the bombing that didn't happen here is, I would say, somewhat of a almost a mystery. And I'll explain that in a minute. I see the layers. That's sort of the fascinating part about going underground. You really see the layers of time. A million years from now, I wonder what our leave behind layer will look like. Hey, you got little bat fellas hanging up there. I don't care. They're all good. And this is where this ends. I imagine if this continued, it would continue into the main tunnels, which I would imagine it was supposed to have connected with eventually. Here's a little bad fella right there. We're just gonna leave him alone. Not much, just a little cave system. Don't bang your head against the ceiling and you'll probably be fine. I'm slowly getting used to, no, you can't go in here. And it's mostly not the historians, because everybody has an intellectual curiosity of wanting to go in and want to see these places. I mean, you tell any kid hidden underground, you'd want to start looking at human nature. But I do think sometimes the safety regulations are a little exaggerated, especially if you're dealing with professional explorers or simply responsible adults that are willing to sign away liability to themselves, as any responsible adult should do. You are liable for your life and your actions. If you crawl in a stupid tunnel and get hurt, it was your choice. I'm fine with that. Well, a little ladder there, a little staircase. Mr. Holland, you can squeeze through here. Gotta make fun of the tall guy. Well, really is some serious rebar though. Shall we go look at the airfield? But if the floor was down there, this cave is way up here. Makes you wonder why. And again, if I had the summer house here, I would build something up here too. It really is some view. Of course, all the trees would have been gone. So now you learn a little bit about trees that we've been talking about in so many previous episodes. These are all younger than 75 years. Yay. And here's the next collapsed tunnel entrance and the next wall and a whole lot of cheerful cows down there. Oh, these were for ventilation machinery that was placed in these holes up here. If I can get up there without... This branch is loose. When you hang on to things, make sure they're attached somewhere. The key part of rappelling. All right. There's another one over there. Life and Times of Tino Struckmann, My Life as a Goat. Yeah. Tree's alive. Stay that way, will you? Oops. Oh well, not much to show you here. A piece of machinery stuck in there. Ventilation. Because this, where I am, I think I need to get a little further away from this so you can actually see it, is facing into the actual factory. So up here would be the ventilation's intake, and this would come into the factory upper floor. This building was just so insanely large. I don't even know what I can show you to give you perspective of how large this building was when it existed. So I'm standing on, I would imagine, the first or second floor of this building, and I'm what, 40-50 meters above the forest floor here. A distance I can cover very quickly by falling and rolling down sideways. Try not to do that. Alright. Okay, so here it's easy to see. Well, here then maybe. Here you see the two holes. This was, I would imagine, the upper floor ventilation intakes, and then out here would extend the building. Now as I keep walking down the forest paths along where this whole construction site was, what is left is a lot of trees and very little rubble. I could film it all, but I'm not cutting you short, but you really wouldn't be able to see anything. Here's a very large rock surrounded by trees. That is what we're seeing. Launch ramp is down here, and here's another large piece that blew up from the demolition. I wonder if they evacuated the entire village when they blew this thing. They almost had to, given the amount of explosives they must have used. Remember, there are several floors in these buildings. And here's the back wall, but it's the back side wall. And just like we see in tunnels, these grooves were made to put in beams that would hold another floor. There were, what, 2 floors at least on this. And looking in grooves in the ground is just, LiDAR would be almost useful in this part where the buildings were because of the detonations post-war. But now here's something interesting. Here's something interesting I want to show you. Remember we said this was not bombed, and I thought that's more of a miracle. This was an area that's known for its fine porcelain sand. That's why the mines were here. And when they started digging and excavating for the planes, they pulled out all the sand, threw it down the hill, and built these enormous buildings with camouflage. See how white this is, how this reflects? That you could see this from the air for miles above because of all this white, fine, powdered sand. So that it wasn't bombed, one cannot help but to think is almost deliberate in the post-war chase that everybody did, trying to get to German technology before the other side. And the Americans counted they could get here before the Russians. And indeed they did, and they got bits and pieces they needed to put some jets together. So, of course, having bombed all these, I am pretty sure, given the flat roofs and the damage they've done to just La Coupole in France, for instance, a bombing would probably have been successful here. And that would have yielded very little of scientific or research value for the post-war American and British Air Force. So one could say that there probably was a calculated effort to not destroy everything of the special constructions the Germans were doing. Here we have an overlay, an overhang. What have we here? An overhang. Alright, so you see here, I believe this will be the end. This will be the end of this building. And here is another platform. Leading down to the ramp up top side. This is perfectly flat. And so there wasn't a building here since it's flat. No reason to destroy it. There was just a platform. Now we're coming down here to the ramp that will take the aircraft up to the runway. Yes, now that I see it from down here, this was where the platform was that would extend all the way over here. So this was a massive explosion. Here. Up here's the large building. You see the remnants of the platform. And that would extend all the way over. Down behind me is where the railroad they built would come. I just thought I saw something that looks like, I don't really know what this looks like. Looks like a strange tunnel entrance. This looks like a collapsed tunnel. That's not really supposed to be here, from what I understand. It's collapsed. On this side of the buildings, there weren't supposed to be any more tunnel entrances. However, oh well, somebody dug something out here and over there. And over there. Okay. Maybe even there. Why? What's all this about? Russian vehicle shelter? Down here on the far end, it's really not supposed to be anything, but somebody's been digging. And in there too. I'm on top of the hill almost, and this is a very large crater. Looks like some of the demolition craters. This should be up here where the runway was. This looks like unnatural stone. This is cement. This is cement. So this could have been the runway up here, which makes it a very thick runway. Or there was a building here. This must have been the runway up here. And this must have been sections of it. The Russians blew it up. Or the East Germans, I think it was the Russians before they left. Which is why there's no flat runway here to see anymore. It was demolished.
The runway up here on top of the mountain is about 1,100 meters long by 33 meters wide. There are several support buildings for parts and crew up here, but the ME262 needed a little bit more than the 1,100 meter runway to take off, so it took off with JTOL, little rocket support pods. These would be dropped after takeoff, and before you go scouring the countryside looking for them, they were reused, so most of them have already been picked up. Sorry.
Here. This doesn't make sense. There's nothing up here. It looks like the roof of it was there, if indeed it was a roof, because I'm not really on the top yet, so there couldn't have been a runway here. So there must have been a bunker or some reinforced building. Alright, didn't see that on the map. Let's go up and see. Find something flat. This is the top of the mountain. So this was the roof. All the trees are younger than the time of the war. And there's absolutely nothing to see. The only indication is that it's flat, it's level. And all the trees are fairly young. If this was as indeed it was, a cemented runway, it was demolished really well. And not only that, might even have been piled on with dirt. The bunkers in the factory is down to our right. There should be some support buildings up here, and Saukel should have had a bunker of some sorts up here. Let's see what I can find, including the top of the ramp, hopefully. It's easy when you're here to see the plateau that was built up here for the planes. So it was completely level for takeoff. But there's really not a lot of signs of anything, which is surprising, considering here was a runway and support buildings. But it was 1,700 kilometers, 700 meters long. So, a bit of walking, see what we'll find. After admiring so much foliage, here I think is the winch house from where the planes would be hoisted up. Yes, it is. This is where the planes would come up, mounted on a platform, sitting on their own wheels, all assembled, ready for the runway. And behind it is an unnaturally large hole, courtesy of, I'm supposing, the Russian military, because here would be a platform. There would be a double winch. I would be here, one with a counterweight and then one pulling the plane. So here would have been a ramp leading inwards to the runway in there, which of course was blown up because, well, you know, why not? Just a simple technical hoist, one plane at a time. from down there. Well, I'm glad they didn't blow this up. At least there's this. I'll imagine it'll be a plate, or the plate will slide in. So the runway's in from here. So the entire factory is down here to the left. Yeah, you really see how it's all been destroyed since, except for the actual little housing. Why? Yeah, why Russia? Why? Part of the demolition of the runway would be this. I'm going to follow the path of the planes best as I can. See if there's even the smallest break of cement left from the runway or any of the support buildings. Yeah, you can see the path. You can see there's a little path coming here where the planes would come in. I can totally see this. Yeah, it's little earth walls, both sides. In this groove here, the planes will be, and wheel themselves this way, or be wheeled this way rather. Just a reminder to you all that it's not just in tunnels there's danger. After a storm and a bit of weather, trees start turning over as well. So be aware of your surroundings when you go exploring. And stepped on these. Buckles. Some light maybe? Electrical. You never know what you find. And here is an air intake or a bunker. Hope there's more to this than that. There goes an air intake. Alright, this continues. I know you guys would like light for this. Well, I don't know if this is a very small air raid shelter. That's in good shape. We'll give it that. The runway is in there, and here's something that was destroyed. It looks like they planted a whole lot of explosive in a somewhat symmetrical pattern and then blew the building up. Unless these were storage or something else. This is the other side of the mountain where the other tunnels, the large tunnels, come out. However, they're also blocked off courtesy of the German government. And here you clearly see the results of the destruction of the runway by a whole bunch of little explosions collapsing it. And that's what's full of holes. You want to destroy a runway, you blow a bunch of holes in it. It's about 1,200 meters long runway. So the jets would have to take off with rocket assist, and the rockets were reused as well. Yeah, this must have been the runway destruction.
The platform the plane sat on was just large enough for the 3 wheels, with the wings sticking out to the side.
It would take a bit of cleaning to get a plane up and down here. Let's see if I can't make it. It really is well overgrown, and it really isn't a very deep groove. But overgrown it is now. I will say, if you're a pilot and you made it up to the top of the hill, it's a damn sight easier to fly off than to walk down it. That's the ramp. And there's still bits and pieces of it. The mountings here. The big bolts hold down the rail. And then over here are all the construction facilities. Wow.
In response to Allied Air Force bombing of key aircraft assembly factories, Adolf Hitler authorized the creation of the Jägerstab, which superseded the Reich Aviation Ministry with the aim of increasing fighter aircraft production. Remember, General Kammler started his career working for them. The task force was established by Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments and War Production, with support from Erhard Milch from the Reich Aviation Ministry, one of Goering'S old friends. While Speer and Milch played a key role in the directing of the activities of the agency, the day-to-day operations were handled by the Chief of Staff, Karl Sauer, the provisional head of the Technical Office of the Armament Industry. Another of these sites were the Bergkristall tunnels in Linz, the first of General Hans Kammler's actively finished underground factories. Now, General Kammler's name is not much associated here with the Reimahg factory. However, he was eventually in charge of the Jägerstab, so he undoubtedly would have been involved. And not far from here is the Doha Mittelbau rocket and jet aircraft factory under his control. Even closer still is the Jonastal S-3, where testing of very experimental weapons were taking place. And quietly, in the back of my mind, I do have a little bit of the problem with these tunnels being so well sealed off and off limits. It's claimed that they were not in use at the time of the war and have been in use since for other purposes. But still, historians are telling us that there are and were 15 kilometers of tunnels that were empty, ready for at least storage use, but not used at all, despite most of these even having existed from before the war started. And right here in Kammler's backyard, I just personally find it a little strange that such an asset was not put to any kind of use at the time of the war. But hopefully at one point we can get to see it, have a tour, and find out what condition it's in and what might be hiding in the very back end of the 15 kilometers. You can park outside and walk through the area. It's a great hike. Bring your dog. There's a lot of uphill walking if you want to see where the runway was, but it can be visited any time. Don't bother the bats though.
Behind me is Vanna von Braun's first test stand. Down the road is Deepness nuclear reactor. Over there is the Maginot Line and all its amazing forts. I'm visiting them all and I'm bringing them to you. So I really appreciate you like, follow, and share what I'm doing, trying to document all these important historical locations. And if you feel like you want to watch more pictures or documents that I use for these, go to lostbattlefields.com. And if you feel like helping me out with my travels, because gasoline and travel and airfare is expensive, my PayPal is there, protectionserviceint.com. You are more than welcome, but you don't have to. I appreciate all your support and all your help, and I love seeing these locations, and I love bringing them to you.